The millionaire CEO left her in pieces with a cold smile. 3 years later, he was the broken one, kneeling before the daughters who carried his eyes. The elevator doors parted with a hush that felt heavier than steel. Alex Harper stepped out, the echo of his shoes slicing through the marble silence of the top floor. People in the hallway straightened like soldiers as he passed, eyes lowered, voices swallowed. Alex didn't just own the building, he commanded the air itself. Sarah gripped her purse tighter, heart thundering against her ribs as she watched him disappear into his office of glass and shadow. Tonight, she would finally speak. Comment which city you're watching from, because every city has a night when someone's world tilts forever. Sarah stood outside his door for a long breath, the weight of 2 futures pressing against her spine. Inside, the skyline burned orange behind floor-to-ceiling windows, the city buzzing below like a restless heart. Alex leaned against his desk, jacket off, sleeves rolled, his presence sharp as the whiskey on the table. For a heartbeat, she almost turned back. But the tiny flutter in her belly reminded her why she couldn't. "Alex," she began, voice trembling like the glass walls around them. He glanced up, the faintest flicker of curiosity cutting through his usual cool. "I'm pregnant." The words hung in the air, fragile and irreversible, a small heartbeat against the vast city hum. For a second, silence wrapped them like a dark curtain. Sarah searched his face for something, fear, joy, anything human. Instead, he laughed softly, a sound colder than the steel beams framing the room. "Pregnant?" He straightened, eyes narrowing, the faintest smile curling like smoke. "And you expect what exactly? That I rearrange my life because of a mistake?" The word sliced her like broken glass. She stepped back, the city lights blurring behind her, as if the whole world had tilted. Her fingers clenched the strap of her purse until her knuckles burned. A mistake? The room smelled of leather and expensive cologne, but beneath it she caught the bitter scent of her own fear. She had imagined shock, maybe even reluctant acceptance. But not this. Alex's gaze stayed steady, unreadable, like a man discussing numbers on a screen rather than a life forming inside her. "Nothing changes," he said at last, voice soft and merciless. "Not for me." The glass walls reflected her pain back at her in 100 cold angles. Her throat burned with words she couldn't release. She thought of the tiny flutter again, the fragile promise no arrogance could erase. Without another glance, she turned toward the door. Each step felt like walking through fire, but her spine straightened with every stride. The elevator swallowed her reflection, leaving Alex alone with the city he thought he owned. Outside, the night wind hit her face, sharp and almost cleansing. The streets glowed wet from a recent rain, neon lights shimmering like fragile stars. Sarah pressed a hand to her stomach, the faintest curve beneath her coat. The child inside her would never know this moment of cold dismissal, not if she could help it. "You will never be defined by his indifference," she whispered to the life she carried. The words steadied her like an unseen hand. Behind her, high above the city, Alex poured another glass of whiskey. The amber liquid caught the skyline like captured fire. For the first time that night, his fingers hesitated on the glass. But he said nothing, did nothing. And Sarah walked into the wet streets with a silent vow burning brighter than any skyscraper light. She would raise this child on her own, and no empire of contempt would ever define their story. The house leaned slightly to one side, as if bowing to the wind, but to Sarah it stood like a fortress. White paint peeled from the porch rails, the small front yard sprouted stubborn weeds, and the roof shingles wore scars of too many storms. Yet the moment she stepped through the creaky wooden door with 2 sleeping babies against her chest, the place became a kingdom. She breathed in the faint scent of dust and old pine, and whispered to her daughters, "Welcome home, my loves." Their tiny sighs filled the empty rooms with a music money couldn't buy. Olivia and Mia grew quickly, each sunrise stretching their voices and their curiosity. Olivia, with her quicksilver grin and fearless eyes, chased light across the walls as if she could trap the sun in her palms. Mia, softer but no less fierce, lingered near Sarah's side, studying every shadow before taking a step. Together they filled the small house with laughter that clung to the peeling paint like morning dew. Sarah watched them with a heart that swelled and ached all at once. The silence Alex had left behind became a canvas for their giggles, their tiny quarrels, the clatter of plastic cups in the sink. On afternoons when the wind carried the smell of cut grass, Sarah spread an old blanket across the terrace. The girls turned the uneven space into whatever their imaginations demanded. A castle of cardboard crowns, a pirate ship with broomstick swords, a theatre where every curtain call ended in squeals. The cracked concrete beneath their feet might as well have been marble. Sarah sat back against the railing, her eyes tracing the outline of their fragile empire, and felt something she hadn't in months, pride so deep it nearly brought her to tears. This is what love builds, she thought, even when the world tries to tear it apart. But when night settled in and the girls drifted to sleep, quiet crept through the house like a tide. Sarah would stand at the small kitchen window, hands wrapped around a chipped mug of tea, staring at the lone streetlight flickering beyond the fence. In the dark reflection of the glass, Alex's face sometimes appeared uninvited, carved from memory and regret. She would shake her head, telling herself that ghosts were only as strong as the thoughts we feed them. Still, the ache remained, a silent echo of the night he dismissed her, the night she promised herself she needed no one. One evening, as twilight bled into the horizon, a car engine murmured down the narrow street. Sarah felt the sound before she heard it, a low vibration against the floorboards. She stepped onto the terrace, heart suddenly alert, and watched a black car slow near the corner. Its windows were tinted, its headlights soft but unyielding. The vehicle paused for a breath, then moved on, tires whispering against the asphalt. She waited until the red taillights disappeared before exhaling. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe. But the air smelled faintly of leather and rain, a scent she couldn't quite forget. Across the street, hidden by shadow, Alex Harper sat behind the wheel of a car he had no reason to drive. From this distance, the house looked even smaller than he imagined, a fragile box of light against the night. Through the terrace window he saw them, two small figures dancing with bedtime energy, a woman leaning against the railing with quiet strength. Something inside him cracked, a soundless fracture sharp and undeniable. He tightened his grip on the steering wheel, the city skyline burning behind him like a distant memory. And for the first time in years, the man who once owned everything felt the sting of what he had lost. Alex Harper's penthouse glittered like a museum of ambition, yet every polished surface whispered of absence. The skyline stretched beyond the panoramic windows, a restless sea of neon and shadow, but he barely saw it anymore. Meetings filled his calendar, contracts arrived by the hour, and every face that greeted him wore the same mask of deference. Still, when the city lights flickered against the glass, he caught the faintest outline of two small figures twirling in a dance only he could see. They were nothing more than tricks of reflection, he told himself, until the reflections began to follow him. At first it was in dreams. He would wake in the velvet dark of his bedroom, heart hammering, convinced he'd heard laughter soft as wind chimes. Two little girls darted through corridors of his mind, their giggles trailing like ribbons. One had his eyes, grey with a touch of storm, and the other carried Sarah's quiet strength. He would reach for them and wake to silence, the cold echo of their absence coiling around his chest. Whiskey dulled the edges for a night or two, but the dreams returned, sharper, brighter, impossible to drown. Even in daylight, the phantoms clung to him. During a board meeting, he glanced at the mirror-polished conference table and saw tiny handprints ghosting the surface, fading before he could blink. In the elevator's chrome panels, two blurred faces flashed like camera ghosts. He tried to bury himself in numbers, in deals worth millions, but spreadsheets blurred until columns of profits looked like playground swings. His assistants whispered about his sudden mood shifts, the way he stared too long at empty corners. Power felt hollow when haunted by laughter he could never touch. One sleepless night he paced the length of his living room, city lights painting silver scars across the floor. The room smelled faintly of leather and the bitter bite of old whiskey. He caught his reflection in the glass wall, except it wasn't only his. Behind him stood two small silhouettes, eyes shining like morning rain. "Daddy," one of them mouthed, lips barely moving, a soundless plea. Alex spun around, breath ripped from his lungs. Nothing. Only the slow hum of the city and the thrum of his own heart. He pressed a trembling hand to the cold glass, his skin leaving a smear of warmth that vanished too quickly. By day, he told himself it was stress. Too many nights without rest, too many buried regrets clawing their way out. But the truth bled through the cracks. In every reflection, he caught a fragment of what he had thrown away. Sarah's determined eyes, the fragile grace of two children who might carry his name. The empire he built felt suddenly small, a tower of glass that could shatter with one whispered question. What if it's not too late? That question followed him into the boardroom, into the back seat of chauffeured cars, into the quiet hours before dawn when the city slept, and only his ghosts remained awake. One morning, after another dream of tiny hands reaching for him, Alex stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows and let the first light of sunrise cut across his face. For the first time in years, the man who once believed nothing could touch him admitted a truth he could no longer outrun. Sarah's children were real, and deep in the marrow of his fear, he knew they were his. The night began with a restless wind that rattled the shutters like impatient fingers. Rain threatened on the horizon, but held back, leaving the air heavy and electric. Sarah tucked Olivia and Mia into bed, smoothing their blankets while their small breaths rose and fell in gentle rhythm. The old house creaked as it always did, but tonight every sound carried a warning she couldn't name. She lingered in the doorway, one hand on the frame, the other unconsciously over her heart, as if she could shield them from something unseen. A faint odor broke the quiet, a sharp, acrid bite that didn't belong to rain or night. Sarah's eyes narrowed. She stepped into the hallway, nostrils flaring. The scent thickened, bitter and unmistakable. Smoke. Her pulse leapt. She rushed to the living room, where a thin grey ribbon curled from the kitchen doorway like a beckoning finger. Flames snapped to life behind it, hungry and sudden, licking the cabinets with violent grace. A crash echoed as glass shattered under the heat. Panic surged through her veins, hot and paralyzing, but the cry of one of her daughters cut through it like a bell. "Mommy!" Mia's voice trembled from the bedroom. Sarah spun and ran, heat following her like a predator. The hallway was already choking with smoke, its wooden floorboards groaning under the growing fire. She burst into the girls' room, coughing against the bitter air. Olivia clutched her sister, eyes wide and wet. "It's okay, babies. Mommy's here," Sarah said, though fear clawed at her throat. She scooped them into her arms, hearts pounding against her chest. The window refused to budge, the lock jammed by years of paint. Behind her, a violent pop signaled the fire's advance. She backed toward the terrace, each breath a knife. Flames raced along the ceiling, devouring photographs and curtains, memories collapsing into sparks. The terrace door groaned under her frantic pull, then gave way. Cool night air rushed in, tasting of rain and metal. But escape ended at the terrace's edge. Below, the small yard was now a pit of sparks. The staircase had already caught, flames climbing like a living thing. Sarah clutched the girls tighter, her lungs screaming for air. Somewhere in the distance, sirens wailed, a promise that felt too far away. Through the swirling smoke, a new sound cut through, the roar of an engine, tires skidding on wet pavement. Headlights sliced the darkness. A figure leapt from a black car and charged toward the house, the silhouette tall, desperate, terrifyingly familiar. "Sarah!" The voice ripped through the chaos. For a moment, she thought the fire had conjured a cruel hallucination. But then she saw him. Alex, face wild, eyes blazing with something more than fear. He bounded up the collapsing stairs, ignoring the sparks that seared his jacket. He burst onto the terrace as the roof groaned above them, a beast ready to fall. Smoke curled around his face, sweat streaking soot across his skin. "Give them to me," he shouted, arms open. Sarah hesitated, 1,000 memories flashing like the sparks around them. His cold dismissal, his cruel smile. But the heat snapped her back. She handed Olivia first, then Mia, her arms trembling with exhaustion. Alex gathered the girls to his chest, coughing violently as he turned to her. "Come on, Sarah!" The terrace railing gave a warning crack. Alex wrapped one arm around Sarah, the other shielding the girls, and barreled through the doorway. Through a storm of flame and falling timber. Heat clawed at their backs, smoke blinding them, but he moved with a ferocity that belonged to something more than muscle, a man who refused to lose them again. They stumbled into the rain just as the roof surrendered with a deafening crash. Outside, the world narrowed to water and fire. Rain pelted their faces, sizzling against the inferno behind them. Alex fell to his knees on the wet grass, the girls clinging to his neck, Sarah collapsing beside them. His chest heaved, eyes reflecting the orange glow of the burning house. For the first time since she'd known him, Sarah saw tears streak his soot-stained cheeks. He held the girls tighter, as if the act alone could keep them alive. Sarah wrapped her arms around them all, the roar of the fire fading to the sound of her own heartbeat, wild, terrified, and inexplicably alive. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and rain-soaked clothing, a sterile hush broken only by the rhythmic beeping of machines. Sarah sat on a narrow bed with Olivia curled against her left arm, and Mia nestled on her right, the three of them wrapped in a single thin blanket. Their small bodies radiated warmth, a fragile comfort against the cold fluorescent light. Outside the window, the blackened skeleton of their home still smoked against the night sky. Every time Sarah closed her eyes, she heard the crack of collapsing wood and the terrifying hiss of fire meeting rain. A soft knock interrupted the monotone of machines. Before Sarah could answer, the door opened. Alex stood there, his once impeccable suit streaked with soot and rain, bandages peeking from beneath the rolled sleeves. The usual armor of arrogance was gone. His eyes, those cold steel eyes that once dismissed her, now carried the raw edge of someone who had stared death in the face. For a long moment he said nothing, just took in the sight of Sarah and the girls, his jaw tightening as if he feared a single word might shatter him. "Are they—" His voice cracked before he could finish. "They're safe," Sarah said, her own voice hoarse from smoke and exhaustion. "Thanks to you." The words felt strange on her tongue, heavy with conflict. Gratitude twisted with old rage, a storm of emotions she wasn't ready to name. Olivia stirred and blinked sleepily at Alex, her tiny fingers reaching toward him without hesitation. He stepped closer, each movement slow, careful. "I'm sorry," he whispered, almost too soft to hear. "For everything. For years of everything." He sank into the chair beside the bed, elbows on knees, eyes fixed on the floor. "The night you told me about them, I thought power meant control. I thought I could erase what I wasn't ready to face. But the fire—" His voice broke, a raw tremor Sarah had never heard before. "I thought I was going to lose all of you before I ever knew them, before I ever even tried." Sarah swallowed hard. "You don't get to rewrite the past, Alex." Her words were sharp, but they trembled at the edges. "You left us before you even met them. You chose power over—" "I know." He looked up, eyes fierce with a desperate honesty that unsettled her. "And I would trade every boardroom, every contract, every dollar to take that night back, but I can't. All I can do is be here now. If you'll let me. If they will let me." His gaze shifted to the girls, who studied him with quiet curiosity. "I don't care if you never forgive me. Just, please don't shut me out of their lives." Mia tilted her head, a tiny frown creasing her forehead. "Are you our daddy?" she asked, her small voice slicing through the heavy air. The question pierced Sarah like a blade. Her breath caught as she searched for an answer, but Alex spoke first, his voice steady despite the tears streaking his soot-stained face. "Yes," he said simply. "I'm your daddy, and I want to be here, if you want me." Olivia reached out, her small hand brushing the bandage on his wrist. "Did the fire hurt you?" Alex swallowed, a faint smile breaking through the pain. "Not as much as losing you would have." Silence settled over the room, thick with unsaid things. Sarah felt the walls she had built begin to tremble. She wanted to scream, to tell him that love wasn't something you could return to like a forgotten investment. Yet watching the way the girls leaned toward him, unafraid, curious, open, she also felt the faint pulse of something she had buried long ago. Hope, fragile as ash. Alex reached across the narrow space, stopping just short of her hand. "I'm not asking for you," he said quietly. "I'm asking for them. Let me prove I can be a father, even if I can never be the man you once loved." Sarah looked at the girls, their innocent eyes reflecting a future she had vowed to build alone. Her heart tightened, torn between the scars of the past and the possibility of something she no longer dared to name. She drew a shaky breath, her voice barely more than a whisper. "For them," she said at last. "Only for them." Alex nodded, a silent promise flickering in his eyes. The monitor beside the bed beeped steadily, a fragile rhythm of life that felt, for the first time in years, like the sound of a new beginning waiting to be tested. The days in the hospital unfolded like fragile pages, each one marked by the quiet rhythm of recovery. Olivia and Mia bounced back quickly, their laughter returning as though fire had never touched their small world. They clambered over Sarah's bed, drew wobbly rainbows on scraps of hospital paper, and turned IV poles into make-believe rockets. Their resilience was both a blessing and a torment, proof of innocence and a reminder of how close she had come to losing them. Sarah smiled for them, but every night her chest tightened, caught between gratitude and the ache of unresolved wounds. Alex lingered in the background, no longer a figure of power, but a shadow learning how to wait. He carried juice boxes from the cafeteria, read aloud from children's books he had bought clumsily at the hospital gift shop, and stood helpless when one of the girls scraped a knee. Gone was the man who once measured life in numbers and contracts. In his place was someone unfamiliar, hesitant, earnest, fumbling. Sarah watched him with suspicion, sharpened by years of hurt, but also with a reluctant curiosity. Could a man who once discarded them now cradle their fragile trust? It was Mia who voiced the question Sarah had dreaded. One evening, as Alex sat beside the bed with a storybook open, Mia tilted her head, her curls falling into her eyes. "Are you our daddy?" The words were soft but carried a weight too big for her small frame. Olivia froze mid-giggle, her gaze darting to Sarah, then back to Alex, as if bracing for the answer. The room hushed, even the beeping machines fading into the background. Sarah's breath caught. She wanted to protect them from disappointment, yet she could not stop what came next. Alex closed the book, his hands trembling slightly as he set it aside. His voice came low, steady. "Yes," he said, meeting their eyes without flinching. "I am your daddy." Silence followed, so thick Sarah thought it might crush her. Then Olivia crawled into his lap without hesitation, her tiny arms wrapping around his neck. "Then you have to read it right," she declared, pointing at the book again. His voice cracked as he laughed, a raw sound filled with something new, joy laced with disbelief. Mia joined her sister, nestling close, and for the first time Alex felt their weight not as burden, but as anchor. Sarah sat stiffly, her chest caught between shattering and mending. Watching them lean against him stirred a storm she wasn't ready to face. Resentment tugged at her ribs, whispering of betrayal and abandonment, but beneath it rose something dangerous, the echo of a hope she thought she had buried beneath ash and silence. Alex's voice faltered over the words of the story, thick with emotion he didn't bother to hide. He pressed his cheek against Olivia's hair, blinking furiously as he read. Sarah turned away, her nails biting into her palm, unwilling to let her daughters see the tears threatening her own eyes. Later that night, when the girls slept curled together in the hospital bed, Sarah sat alone by the window. Rain tapped softly against the glass, the scent of damp earth seeping through the cracks. She pressed her forehead to the cool pane, eyes closed, heart warring with itself. Forgiveness felt like a mountain too steep to climb. Yet as she replayed the image of her daughters resting in Alex's arms, safe and unafraid, the sharp edges of her anger dulled. "I don't know if I hate you anymore," she whispered to the night, her voice breaking, "and I don't know if that terrifies me more than loving you once did." The first morning outside the hospital smelled of wet grass and new beginnings. Sarah held the girls' hands as they stepped into the thin winter sunlight, her heart still bruised from sleepless nights. Alex followed a few steps behind, carrying a bag of donated clothes and the awkwardness of a man unsure where he belonged. The fire had stripped them of possessions and certainties, leaving only questions. Yet, as Mia and Olivia ran ahead to chase a flock of pigeons, Alex felt something stir, an urge stronger than any boardroom victory. He didn't want to leave them behind again. Days turned into a slow, uneasy rhythm. Alex began visiting every afternoon, arriving not in his sleek chauffeured car but in an old sedan he drove himself. He surprised Sarah by selling 2 of his companies. The news splashed across financial headlines. "They'll call it madness," he said with a faint shrug when she confronted him. His tailored suits replaced by plain shirts rolled at the sleeves. "Let them. I'm learning what matters, even if it means losing everything else." His words landed between them like fragile glass, beautiful but too easily shattered. His lessons began small. He tried to braid Olivia's hair, only to tangle the strands into a stubborn knot that made her giggle until tears rolled down her cheeks. He attempted to tie Mia's shoelaces, ending in a loop so loose she tripped 3 steps later. He burned pancakes, spilled juice, and forgot the lyrics to the bedtime song he insisted on singing. Each failure sent a flicker of frustration across his face, but the girls met every mistake with laughter and applause. "You're funny, Daddy," Mia declared after he dropped a spoonful of syrup onto his own lap. Sarah watched from the doorway, her heart an unpredictable tide. Every clumsy effort chipped at the image of the cold, untouchable man she once knew. He crouched low to their level, eyes soft, voice patient, even when his own pride must have screamed for escape. Sometimes she caught him studying the girls with a wonder so raw it almost hurt to witness. Other times she noticed the tremor in his hands when he thought no one was looking, a man terrified of failing at something that couldn't be bought or negotiated. One evening, as twilight poured gold across the small apartment they now shared, Sarah found Alex in the kitchen, sleeves rolled, trying to stir a pot of pasta, while Mia balanced on a chair beside him. "It's supposed to boil," Mia announced with the authority of a queen. Alex laughed, a sound rich with warmth. "I'm learning from the best," he said, glancing at Sarah with a sheepish grin. For a heartbeat, the sight disarmed her. The once arrogant CEO bending over a wobbly pot, a child's hand guiding his own. The memory of his past cruelty flickered, but the present burned brighter. Later that night, after the girls had fallen asleep amid a fortress of stuffed animals, Sarah stepped onto the small balcony. The air smelled faintly of rain and new earth. Alex joined her, leaning on the railing, his silhouette framed by the moonlit street. He said nothing, only stood close enough for her to feel the quiet thrum of his presence. For the first time in years, she didn't pull away. As the city hummed around them, Sarah realized that the man beside her was no longer the tyrant of her nightmares, nor yet the hero her daughters adored. He was simply a father, flawed, uncertain, but staying anyway. And somehow, that was more powerful than perfection. Spring crept into the city with shy blossoms and warm, hesitant winds. The new apartment was small but bright, its windows catching the early morning sun like open arms. Life settled into an unexpected rhythm. School mornings with messy ponytails, evenings filled with the smell of simmering soup, and nights when the girls fell asleep mid-laughter. Alex came every day, sometimes with groceries, sometimes with nothing but his tired smile. He never announced himself with the old sharp confidence. Instead, he arrived like a quiet tide, content to stay at the edges until invited closer. Sarah noticed the change before she admitted it. He no longer tried to dazzle her with grand gestures or expensive gifts. Instead, he fixed the crooked kitchen cabinet without being asked. He learned to fold the girls' tiny socks into perfect pairs. He stayed late when Olivia had a cough, sitting on the floor beside her bed until her breathing steadied. There was a patience in him now, a gentleness she once believed impossible. And yet, every act of kindness pressed against the scar tissue of her heart, forcing her to confront the painful truth. Forgiveness was no longer a distant theory. It was slowly becoming a choice. Most evenings ended on the narrow balcony, the same space where Sarah once vowed to raise her children alone. Now it became a quiet meeting ground. Alex would lean against the railing, watching the city lights flicker like distant stars, while Sarah sipped tea and pretended to study the moon. They rarely spoke of the past. Instead, they shared small observations, the way Olivia hummed when drawing, Mia's sudden fascination with ladybugs, the stubborn leak in the bathroom sink. Words were few, but the silences carried a weight that neither dared to break. One night, a soft breeze carried the faint scent of rain and lilac. Sarah stood beside Alex, their shoulders nearly touching, and felt the strange electricity of being near someone who once burned her life down and was now quietly rebuilding it. Her heart beat with a rhythm she had sworn to forget. "They adore you," she said at last, her voice low, almost lost to the wind. Alex turned, surprise flickering across his face before he nodded. "I adore them back," he whispered. The simple confession cracked something deep inside her, a fissure she had fought to keep sealed. Memories of their first encounter, the arrogance, the cruel dismissal, flashed through her mind like sparks from the fire they had survived. But when she looked at him now, she saw a man standing unarmed, his power surrendered not from defeat, but from choice. She wanted to hate him for changing, for making forgiveness seem less like weakness and more like possibility. "Why are you still here?" she asked quietly, eyes fixed on the horizon. Alex exhaled, the sound rough and real. "Because leaving once was the worst mistake of my life," he said, "and because I want to prove that staying can mean something." The city hummed below them, a restless ocean of lights. Sarah gripped the balcony railing, the cool metal grounding her as her heart wavered between fear and longing. She didn't move when Alex's hand rested lightly over hers, the touch tentative, almost questioning. For a moment she let it stay. The night air wrapped around them like a fragile promise, of wounds slowly healing, of love quietly reborn, of a future still waiting to be chosen. And Sarah understood with sudden clarity that the greatest battle was no longer with Alex, but with the walls she had built around her own heart. Years softened the edges of tragedy, weaving new seasons through the scars they all carried. The rebuilt house rose on the same plot of land where fire once consumed their world. Its walls were simple but strong, painted a warm cream that glowed beneath hanging flower baskets. The terrace, once a stage for childhood games and midnight vows, now overflowed with life. Pots of lavender, a second-hand hammock, chalk drawings from endless afternoons. Olivia and Mia darted across it like wild birds, their laughter blending with the hum of summer cicadas. Alex arrived early that evening, dressed not in tailored armor, but in a soft linen shirt rolled at the sleeves. He carried no briefcase, no phone, only a bouquet of wildflowers the girls had taught him to pick along the roadside. Sarah watched from the doorway, heart tightening as he crossed the garden. Time had carved faint lines around his eyes, but they spoke of growth, not exhaustion. He had become a fixture in their lives. School drop-offs, late-night fevers, birthday cakes slightly crooked but baked with devotion. Yet despite everything, Sarah's heart still carried the memory of the night he'd broken it, a wound that time had never fully erased. Dinner unfolded in the golden glow of the terrace. Olivia and Mia recited stories from school, their voices rising like small fireworks. Alex listened with quiet wonder, laughing at every mispronounced word, applauding every exaggerated detail. Sarah caught herself watching him when she thought he wouldn't notice, studying the way he reached for the girls' plates before his own, how he tilted his head to hear every word as if nothing in the world mattered more. Something inside her, something she had fought to keep dormant, stirred awake. As twilight deepened, the girls dashed inside to fetch a forgotten toy. The terrace fell into a hush, broken only by the distant buzz of crickets. Alex stood slowly, his chair scraping softly against the stone. Sarah felt the air shift, the same way it had years ago when he once shattered her life with a single sentence. But this time his eyes held no arrogance, only a quiet resolve. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small wooden box, the kind a child might carve in shop class, its surface sanded smooth by careful hands. "I used to think power was everything," he said, his voice steady but thick with emotion. "But power can't braid hair. It can't chase nightmares away. It can't give back the years I lost by being blind. You gave me something stronger than power. You gave me them, and somehow you gave me the chance to change." He opened the box, revealing a simple silver ring that caught the last streaks of sunset. "I'm not promising riches or perfection. I'm promising late-night stories, burnt pancakes, and a life beside you, if you'll have me." Sarah's breath caught, the world narrowing to the soft glint of the ring and the man holding it. Memories of their beginning, his cold dismissal, the years of silence, flashed like distant lightning. Yet layered over them were new memories: Alex kneeling to tie Mia's shoe, Alex whispering encouragement at Olivia's first recital, Alex holding their hands through countless small storms. Her heart trembled beneath the weight of love and fear, a balance she had never mastered. Before she could answer, the terrace doors burst open. Olivia and Mia bounded outside, their arms full of wildflowers and giggles. "What's happening?" Olivia asked, eyes wide with delighted suspicion. Alex knelt lower, the ring still in his hand. The girls gasped in unison, rushing to his side. Sarah's throat tightened as their small arms wrapped around both of them, their laughter spilling into the warm night. The question lingered unspoken, suspended in the glow of fireflies and the quiet promise of a life rebuilt, waiting for a single word to turn love into forever. The night air shimmered with the scent of jasmine and the faint hiss of distant sprinklers. Sarah stood frozen beneath the terrace lights, her heartbeat echoing louder than the crickets. Alex knelt at her feet, the silver ring catching stray sparks of moonlight. Olivia and Mia clung to his shoulders, eyes wide with wonder, their giggles weaving through the tense stillness. In that fragile pause, Sarah felt every year of loss and every quiet evening of rebuilding press against her ribs. The past whispered of betrayal, the present pulsed with a question too large to hold. Alex's voice broke the silence, rough and low. "I don't deserve forgiveness for the man I was," he said, his gaze steady on hers. "But I will spend every breath proving I'm not that man anymore. I'm not asking for a fairy tale. I'm asking for a chance to grow old beside the life we've built, burnt pancakes, messy mornings and all." His eyes glistened, unshielded, a quiet storm of love and regret. Sarah felt her defenses crumble like ash beneath rain. Years ago, he had turned away from her with cold finality. Tonight, he was offering not power or wealth, but the humility of a man who had knelt in fire and chosen to rise different. The smell of smoke from that long-ago night seemed to return, mingling with the soft scent of flowers, a reminder of everything they had survived. Her chest ached with the realization that love, real love, was never neat. It was scarred, imperfect, and tested by flame. She dropped to her knees before she realized she had moved, her hands trembling as they found his. "You broke me once," she whispered, tears spilling freely now. "But you also saved us. You saved yourself, and somewhere in all that pain, we became a family." Her voice cracked, but she did not pull back. "I can't promise perfection either, but I can promise this: we keep choosing each other even when it's hard." Olivia squealed and Mia clapped, their small voices rising like bells. "Say yes, Mommy," they chorused, their faces shining with innocent certainty. Sarah laughed through her tears, the sound raw and beautiful. "Yes," she breathed, the single word carrying the weight of every sleepless night, every stubborn wall, every fragile hope. Alex slipped the ring onto her finger, his touch gentle, reverent, sealing a promise forged not in ease but in fire. The four of them collapsed into an embrace beneath the terrace lights. Sarah felt the warmth of her daughters pressed between them, the strength of Alex's arms around them all. The world beyond their garden still held storms, but here, within these scarred and tender walls, love had proven itself through loss and rebuilding. It wasn't a perfect ending. It was better. It was real. And as the night deepened around them, Sarah understood at last. The true power of love was not in never falling, but in rising again, hand in hand from the ashes.